Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Summer of Drawing. This is class number 4, Graphite and Landscapes, Part 2. So last time I was talking about graphite just as pencils to get us started. But now I'd like to do a little bit more of an explanation as to what's in those pencils. So here we have a couple of definitions for you. Graphite is a gray crystalline allotropic form of carbon which occurs as a mineral in some rocks and can be made from coke. It is used as a solid lubricant in pencils and as a moderator in nuclear reactors. So just in case you wondered what was going on inside your pencil, this hunk of metal over here on the right is what carbon pencils are made from. And right below, we have an image of a type of pencil that is basically a woodless pencil. The whole thing is just graphite or carbon. What I didn't realize until I read the Wikipedia entry was that under high pressures and temperatures, it converts to diamond. So that's pretty cool. So here are some more of those forms of graphite I was talking about. Up in the upper left-hand side, you've got a pan version that can be used with brush and water. There's a stick version, sort of compressed. You can get blocks of different sizes of graphite. There's also graphite blocks that have pigment added to them, which you can see on the lower right. And then there's graphite powder, which is used for all kinds of softer effects and can add a lot of depth to a drawing. It's also pretty messy stuff and tends to be used on large scale drawings. So once again, these are the tools we'll be using mostly today. They're the same ones I showed you last week: erasers, household pencils, something to sort of smudge with, something to sharpen with, mechanical pencils, and then just a selection of different softnesses and darknesses of pencils, which I find to be very useful. So I thought I'd do a little bit of a recap of what we were talking about yesterday. I went back home and then did a couple of basically cleaner and more design-oriented notans than I did when I was out actually down at Dyke Bridge. And the reason I did this is because I wanted to really take both of those design concepts a little bit further, but not do an actual sketch yet. I just wanted to keep it at the note form so that, when I do go back to this in the future, I can figure out what I'd like to do. So you can see up here on the one of the bridge, I decided to do that idea I talked about where I went for a slightly smaller view. And then I've also, if you squint and look at the photograph, you can see how I've kind of pumped up the design aspect of this. And when I draw it, I'm going to want to keep that feeling. I decided to show more of the sandy bridge opening because I thought that was sort of interesting. It shows you it's a bridge and leads you across without you having to show the other side as well. I also made a note about the light direction so that I can make sure that when I do my final sketch, that I'm really concentrating on showing how the light is coming from one direction. For example, how it's hitting the upright pilings that are near the rocks and how you can see shading on one side. Likewise, on the second sketch, the osprey nest, down below, I indicated the light direction. And there's something else I did where I changed something about the scene. So I don't know if you remember, but the wind was at my back. And so the way that the wind is blowing, it causes little wavelets on the top of the water. If we were to stand on the other side of that little spit of land where the osprey nest is, we would see there was a bit of calm, and then you would see the wavelets again. And that is because the land itself is blocking the wind from the other side of the water. So I decided that effect would be kind of interesting if I reversed it and pretended that the wind was coming from another direction, because it doesn't really affect anything other than the water in this sketch. But I liked the idea of having a little bit of a calm, because the water would look lighter in that area, and then where the wavelets were, it would be darker. And so as you can see on the right, I made quite a few changes. I decided to add a little ridge of bushes on the far right side. I decided to move one of those dark trees in a little bit. I decided to make kind of a ripply design across the water that I thought would look interesting. So if I ever do go back to doing something more complete with this, I've got this idea of a design that's based on what I saw, but I edited and moved things around. So you should always feel free to play around with your scenes like that. All right, so we're going to go back over some of this notan and sketch stuff again, step by step, so you understand exactly where we're going. And then I'm going to give you a little bit of time to do a little drawing of this scene. So just bear with me while I take you through this all again. So when you select a scene to draw, you might be walking down the path like I was at My Toy Gardens, and I saw this lovely little scene, and I said, "Gosh, it'd be nice to do a little sketch of this. What shall I draw?" So before I started doing the whole thing, I decided I was just going to pick a little bit of a portion of this scene to draw. It doesn't take much of a sketch to bring back the memory of a place. And as people say in painting and in drawing, it's not how you draw or paint, it's how you draw or paint it. So it's the how, not the what. That's what makes it distinctive, like your own handwriting. So using a viewfinder, uh, making a notan or several, like I just did for the Dyke Bridge and for the Osprey, doing a rough sketch or several rough sketches helps you figure out, what you think is interesting about a scene. So in this case, just sort of follow along with me as I do that. I started looking for areas of contrast. I found this the bottom of the trunk that looked kind of interesting, but not really as a drawing. It's sort of very central. And it's balanced, but it needs a bit of something else. So our eyes are drawn to the areas of greatest contrast in a drawing or a painting or photograph. So as you go about your regular lives. Have a look around you at things that you see and also artwork and photographs and see how your eye naturally goes to that area where there's the greatest contrast. Then, when you're looking at the scene or when you're holding your viewfinder up, squint to see that the areas that are then dark make an interesting design. In this particular case, like I said, I wanted a little bit more than I saw up front. I decided, hey, a little bit of that rock and some of that shading, a few more of the branches, that would make something interesting. So I decided this looked pretty good, and let me go ahead and do a little sketch and a notan of this. So as I said, I wanted to be sure, and so I did a little dark and light drawing, a little notan. And that is in part because I can't hold this viewfinder up all the time. I need to be able to reference some kind of idea of balance while I'm doing the sketch and while I'm looking at the scene as a whole. So here we go. And I'd like you to do this with me. This will be an exercise we do together, just sort of step by step. So you can see up here on the right, first draw a rectangle the same shape as the viewfinder opening. So you can just sort of pretend this is your viewfinder and put those tick marks in there. Then study the scene. Have a good look at it. There's a rock, some shadows, some branches, tree trunk, and look at where the objects are in relation to those little tick marks on the side. So the rock on the left is where the left tick mark is. The main branches really barely come across the center. Um, and then what you want to do then is just sort of draw a few lines in your rectangle to sort of show where some of these things are. And then very quickly, just make a dark and a light drawing, just black and white. Um, as you can see, it doesn't have to be very accurate, but you do want to get a sense of, we got the light tree over on the one side, a little bit of a rock, and we've got this directional lighting on the ground that sort of lies across. So go ahead and take a little time just to sketch that out, just as you see right here. Now, I'm always talking about squinting. So even while you're drawing, see if you can continue to sort of squint at the scene to get you to stop thinking about this as a tree and rocks and ground and that sort of thing. You want to keep looking at this as just shapes, light and dark shapes. Um, Hold your eyes close enough together that you can barely tell what the objects are, and just look at the shape of the dark shapes. Look at the try to figure out what is that. That's a triangle over on the right where the branches and the ground sort of meet right before that light area. And what sort of shape is that? And then thinking about that shape, you go over to your sketch and you try to draw or darken in a patch that is the same shape as that. So you're really sort of trying to match what you see in your notan to what is there in the scene in terms of reproducing shapes. Now, of course, you have to put a few lines down to get started. It's very difficult just to start sketching and not have a few guidelines. But what you're trying to do in this particular case is just do masses of darks rather than thinking about drawing a tree and drawing a rock. Now, as you have seen me do when I do my sketches, sometimes I have to draw those objects kind of like objects, kind of like really a rock or a tree or whatever, to be able to get the shape right. So don't feel that that's a wrong thing to do, that you have to only do this a certain way and make your sketch look just like mine is over there on the right. Not at all. Whatever it takes for you to get to the point where you have just a little notan and just a couple of minutes of light and dark will be just fine. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's move on just a little. Okay, so we're going to just segue for a minute to angles again. And I had a couple of questions this last week about angles. So it doesn't matter what angle you're trying to draw, whether it's a right angle or a sloping angle, a really acute angle, whatever it happens to be. What you're dealing with and the reason why it's so difficult to get the angles right, and even if you're an experienced artist trying to look at an object and then get it just right on your page or on your painting or whatever is very difficult. And that is because our brain is constantly feeding us data about what we're looking at that doesn't actually always correspond to what you need as an artist when you're trying to actually represent something. So if your brain is looking at the bridge or a box and saying, those are right angles, that's a 45-degree angle, that's a 90-degree angle. However, if that box is tilted or that bridge is tilted or it's just a complex object and hard for you to discern which angle is where, you need a way to break that down and to simplify. And that's what this whole business of using the pencil is all about. What you're doing at that point is going, regardless of what my brain is telling me, I am holding up this pencil at the angle I actually see in front of me. And that is the angle I need to draw. So I'm going to hold the pencil up, look at that object, and then without actually moving the angle of the pencil, I'm going to very carefully pull my hand back over to my sketch and check the angle that I drew already to find out, was I right or does it need correcting? So here we have an example where I'm just checking the angle of one of the major tree branches. I've taken my best shot at it on my sketch. I just want to make sure before I go on that I've got it right. So here I am doing that exact exercise. Once again, here I am checking the top of the rock, the angle of the top of the rock, and making sure that's just where I want it because I have a very specific look I want for this sketch, let's say. Likewise, I'm now checking the relationship between the bottom of the rock and the bottom of the tree. And what I do when I check with my pencil is I make sure that's just right. And then on my sketch, it'll be just right as well. It takes the guesswork out. But it is a little bit difficult to get used to. Um, and the reason why it's worth going through this and worth going ahead and trying to measure these angles is that you start to give your brain a bit of a break. You tell it, hey, thanks very much. I really appreciated all that information you gave me. But actually, I have different information I'm trying to get at this point. And you train your brain to start looking for those angles instead. And so that when you make your best guess when you first sketch on your page, you start to get more and more accurate. There'll always be those that are very, very difficult, angles that are very foreshortened. Or angles that are on something like that bridge where it's really complex and it's hard to look at it and figure out what angles are where. When I did that second little notan, I probably drew those top railings, 3 or 4 times before I really got, I got the tiny little changes in the angles that were there. So just keep trying. All right. Another point I'd like to make about the notan is that when you do these notans and you squint and you find the dark and light, it doesn't mean that your drawing itself is going to be only like black and white. What will happen as you start actually sketching is you're going to break down those areas of darks and the areas of lights into a greater range of values. However, you're going to keep all of the dark area to various different dark values and all of the light area to various different light values. And that way you retain that sense of design. And what happens as you're drawing, and you'll see from an example I'll show you a little bit later today, that as you go along, you do lose, you lose that dynamic quality while you're putting down all those midtones. But you have that notan to refer to say, hey, I want that punch back. And so perhaps I need to darken some of my darks, or perhaps I need to, just make sure I didn't let that area get too light in relationship to the lighter area. So here's just a quick example where I started adding the darks in, and I'm trying to keep them all on the darker side. And I probably, when I finish sketching the whole background in, I would probably have to go back and readjust some of that to keep that sort of sense of dynamism. It doesn't have to get as dark as the notan. That's just part of the roadmap to getting to the sketch that has, something interesting going on in it. Okay, so once again, the viewfinder is so useful. I know, just like the notan, I keep going on about it. But these are just some examples of how I could be looking at that scene and I could pick different, uh, I could find different things to draw. So here's one example in the middle, which is just the rock. Doesn't even have the tree in it. That's a nice little, if you squint and look at that, that's a nice little sort of slope coming down and the flowers in the front. And here's the other one, which actually is a larger scene, takes in more of that foreground, more of the tree. Beautiful, beautiful dark shadow areas there. A more complex drawing as well. There's an awful lot more going on in there. So, there are always lots of options. It's whatever you like. And we're going to now talk about a couple of other artists, just to give you something different to look at. So as I was looking around on the internet trying to find some really good pencil artists for you to look at, I came across Harry Stooshinoff, whose work I had seen before. He is a Canadian artist up in Ontario, and he does these fabulous, really small drawings and paintings. Um, they are, I think some of his paintings are probably about 5 inches wide. Some of the pencil drawings are 3, 4 inches wide. He likes to work really small, and he likes to do these little drawings like this of the landscape. And once again, talking about just responding to the landscape and responding to what you see, the dark and light patterns, different interesting things you can do with your pencil. Harry's work is just amazing. He does, by the way, he has an Instagram and a website. Definitely worth following him on Instagram. He also has an Etsy page where he sells these small paintings, and he takes the sketches and makes them into small fridge magnets. So I just thought that was a very clever thing to do. Here's some more examples of his work. And you can see this is exactly what we've been talking about the last class and this one. Just this whole idea of a strong, dynamic, dark and light, lots of values, lots of different interesting pencil strokes, not holding back. And here's the last. I particularly like that one on the left. He lives, as I said, in Ontario, and I used to live in Ontario, and that is the kind of winter scene that you get through, northern United States and up into Canada. Perhaps early in the spring when the snow is starting to melt. And then an artist who is completely different, Lloyd Rees, an Australian artist who unfortunately isn't with us any longer. He had a long and very productive life. He was a painter, but what is interesting, he always drew, but he at some point he was very frustrated about something to do with his painting, and he kind of took a break and spent 6 years really dedicating himself to drawing, and it reinvigorated his artwork, and he came to just really love drawing as a tool, as a medium in and of itself, um, a form of expression. So here's an example you can see over here on the right. You can see that he's got a particular sort of pencil stroke he's using here that's really effective and leaving certain areas of the building with nothing on it, lots of values from the darkest to the lightest. But this style is not the only style he used. Here's another really subtle, just beautifully rendered drawing. Just the most delicate tonal changes. And if you have any time this week to try drawing, uh, I've got some exercises at the end of the class you can use. But if you're interested, trying to reproduce something like one of Lloyd Rees's drawings, if you're having trouble keeping your pencil subtle, um, just try to copy one of his drawings. It will really help you get a little bit of control over the pencil. Here's another really great example. This one is a little more rough, but what's wonderful about this, notice how the back of that building just fades into the trees. It's just not it's not the most important part of the drawing. It's not what he's actually, getting you to concentrate on. Your eye is really drawn over to those dark trees against the skyline and kind of the design that makes. But if you look closely at this drawing, especially over on the right-hand side, you see the fence posts, and then you see there are two guys out there, digging fence posts or repairing the fence, doing something. Just a nice little human touch in there. At the same time, Lloyd Rees, I keep showing you all of these different sketches of people, creating something that was really quick. And the reason I'm doing that is I'm trying to give you confidence. Confidence to just go out there and start sketching. Or sit in your living room and sketch from photographs or from what you see out the window. But the idea is that even somebody like Lloyd Rees, with all of that control over the pencil, those beautiful finished pieces. This is what he was doing when he was, when he was out there. He was doing sketches just the way that we do them. This is a gorgeous piece he did for the mid 50s. I mean, this is something that took him a lot of time. He probably went back and did a number of sketches. There's a lot of imagination involved in this, where he sort of created almost a fantasy scene here of the distant town, of the boats, this just incredible tree and the way that it moves around. However, this is also another one of his sketches of trees. And you can see this is one that was done while he was probably sitting right out there, whereas the other one wasn't. The other one was definitely what I would call a studio piece. So there is so much range to what can be done with pencils. And whether you're interested in the sketchy end or whether you're interested in the very, very detailed, taking some time to use this as a form of expression, I think is really worth it. There's so much that can be done. All right, so another recap about landscape. So one thing I didn't really point out a lot as we were talking last week was how distant landscape is actually usually, unless it's a very clear day, you're seeing it through layers of atmosphere, and that could be dust or mist or clouds or just distance. So that lends that kind of bluish look to mountains and hills, and even the end of your yard looks a little bit bluer than the yard, the backyard that's up close to you, which will have more of a brighter green look to it. Um, so you can see these examples right here show you exactly that kind of effect. And this is something we can use while drawing. We can give a sense, an illusion of distance just by having the background lighter and the foreground having a little more detail to it. However, always go with what you see. Just like last week, those hills were really prominent. They did not fade into the background. So that doesn't always apply, but it is one of those things to look for, is how atmosphere is affecting the landscape. And here's an example of that. So we've got on the right-hand side, you can really see, I mean, that mountain looks really dark. So that obviously tells us it's a very clear day. And if we're going to draw this particular scene, we've got a couple of things that are kind of interesting. You know, we've got these shadows going back and forth and making these horizontal lines. We have the trees disappearing into the distance. You can tell we're at about trunk level because the trees, the angles of the trees as they get smaller are uh, the angle is heading downwards to our horizon line, to where our eye level is. But if I were to draw that scene, I would probably either lighten that mountain so that it's more like the mountain on the left-hand side, or I would lighten the trees, the distant trees, so there was a little bit of a contrast there. So that's where we as artists, we get to manipulate the scenes the way that we want them to make them work for what we're trying to show. There's nothing to be gained by confusing somebody who's looking at the drawing, just by making this a big dark lump in the background. Although from a notan point of view, it really is perfect. All right. So, and now water, because this is going to apply to what we're going to draw today. If you're a drone or in an airplane or a helicopter and you're above a body of water, it is just like looking into the teacup that we were talking about the other week. Depending on our point of view, the curves of a shoreline will appear more circular when we're over them. And as we sink down to the point where we're standing on the shoreline becomes a series of very shallow ovals. And I'm going to show you how that works. So here you can see what I mean about circular. Now, this is a very circular body of water, but even if this had all kinds of little inlets flowing in and out, each one of those curves of those inlets would be more circular looking when we're above. So how this works is that when we are over the top of a body of water, it is like being over the top of the teacup, looking at it and reading the tea leaves. But as those lakes or bodies of water disappear into the distance, you can see how they flatten out. It is just like these teacups down here on the left-hand side. The ones that we're closer to, that we're sort of over the top of, or we can look into, we can see more of that. Those openings are more circular. And as you see the openings of the far cups, those are ovals that are very squished down, much flatter. So I thought I'd illustrate that a little bit for you with these circles right here on this photograph we just looked at. And you can see how the curve of the land that is closest, even when it's inlets or little kind of coves, little edges, those have a more circular shape to them. And then as these bodies of water go further away, they flatten out in our view, just like looking at the top of the teacups, so that the ones in the distance are very flat. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is because we're going to do something in a few minutes with a body of water that has a body of water in it. And one of the biggest sort of mistakes people make is we know the shape of a body of water when we look at it, and we have a tendency to draw it too much as if we are looking over the top of the teacup and not enough looking at it as it really appears to us in perspective. So here's an example. So we were above a lake, then we were kind of looking across a bunch of lakes. Now we're getting a little bit down to the actual same level as the lake. We're getting close down to the shoreline at this point in these views here. And you can see how those ovals are now flattening out. The even the undulations of the shoreline have more of a flatter oval look rather than a big round circle. And particularly when you get down to, the ones on the right, you can really see how that flattens out. And I've drawn, once again, these orange ovals in these particular photographs, so you can see how this works. You can see that I'm really intent on telling you about this, but it's because it's one of those things that, once again, data from our brain is telling us that the shape, for example, of that mountain pond is circular. And we have to remind ourselves that yes, it is, but when looked at in perspective, something that is circular, depending on where our eye level is, will appear more oval, and an oval that's either more round or more flat, depending on where that object is in relation to our eyes. So when we are almost down at the shoreline, when we're almost at the same level of the water, we're getting closer and closer to that body of water, just looking like a very, very thin space that we're trying to represent. And we have to make sure that we draw it that way. And one of the ways to do that is to take note of those undulations of the shoreline and draw those curves uh, appropriately. So how you do that is really just practice, and it's a matter of observing. So as you go around, if you have any ponds or lakes or shoreline or anything around you, or even a puddle or anything of that sort, puddles that are closer to you, puddles that are further down the street, you can see this in action. And this is, I'm always saying about observation and practice are the keys to mastery. Well, this is the observation part. All right, so we are going to be at My Toy Gardens today drawing. And My Toy Gardens is very close to Dyke Bridge. It's a wonderful, very small Japanese garden. Takes about 45 minutes to go through it, but it's a lovely place to sit. It's very close to the beach. And this was sort of I guess, a plaything of Hugh Jones. He's the one who started it. On his death, he sort of left the care of it to Mary Wakeman. And then, unfortunately, I think it was Hurricane Bob came through and really devastated it, just blew the place apart. And Julie Moore Messervy, I think is how you say her last name, was brought in. She's a proper landscape architect to fix it up, and it really turned into something delightful. So after my fun down at the Dyke Bridge where I was being blown around, I decided when I went out to to take some videos to show you, that I would come to this really lovely, calm place. Um, all right, so the body of water we're going to be drawing today is this little scene right here. Actually, a portion of this scene. But I wanted to show you how, as this stream bends around and gets further away from us, even though it's really, really subtle, you can see how the curves of the land, or the curves of the water, depending on how you want to look at it, become more flat oval as they go further in the distance, and they're rounder where they're up close to where I'm standing. So this is just something to pay attention to, because it'll help you in all of your drawings of bodies of water to keep this in mind. See, that teacup was all for something. I wasn't just making you draw teacups for nothing. So what we have here is basically my view of what I thought was very interesting about this little waterway and what we were looking at. There was so much information there that I had to take the viewfinder and really decide, what I thought would be the best balance. Now, you might, pick something different if you were out there. But what we're going to do right now is, for the next 10 minutes or so, is go ahead and draw this as a notan and then get started on some kind of rough sketch, or at least, getting the framework for something that was more detailed. And just like with every week, you'll get a PDF of these images after the class. So if you want to do a more detailed drawing, you can go ahead and sort of just get yourself started for something that you would do later. So go ahead and start working away. A little bit of a notan first based on what you see through the viewfinder, and then using hash marks perhaps if you need to plot out where things are, or just general lines, checking your angles by using your pencil to try to get those curves in the right place, a lot of squinting so that you can see where the lights and darks are, and also a good deal of editing. And I'm going to just sort of chatter away while you're doing that. So one of the things I want to point out while you're sketching is how to decide what to eliminate. Well, the first thing is that this scene in a photograph does look a bit different than what I was actually seeing when I'm out there. I could, the camera blows out, makes very bright the things that are in the distance where the sun was shining. So where those daffodils were in the upper right-hand corner, I could actually see more that was going on back there. And that it does make it difficult when you're working from photographic reference because you are relying on what the camera saw. If I had actually wanted those daffodils in, that's where the beauty of doing a sketch right on the spot definitely helps. And that's why I make those little notes when I write little things to the side to help me remember what was really there, just in case when I get home and look at the pictures, on my phone or the camera or whatever, and they just aren't, up to snuff. I'll have some idea of what was happening. But essentially, when I look at a scene like this and I'm drawing and I don't have color to differentiate, the first thing I do, of course, is squint. And I see that, for example, all those orange leaves that are reflected in the water really are not necessary to the design. And if I start trying to sketch those all in, at least if I'm working at, 3 by 5 or a 4 by 6 size, that's going to be really hard, to make that look water-like. What I need instead is I need these reflections of the things that are above the water. I need to get that effect in more than I need to have all of those tiny leaves. Likewise, where there are large groupings of objects, for example, all the daffodils at the side of the water, um, all of the leaves that are reflected in the water, I can deal with those as kind of a mass of objects, like a mass of shapes, and I can simplify or edit, or I could simply change it as long as, for example, those reflections have kind of a leaf-like and branch-like look. I can make them do what I want them to. I can change them around, or I can leave some out, or I can meld some of them together. Um, and those are things that sometimes will just happen when you draw because we're inexact, right? We're not in there able to do every little tiny branch that we see. And so sometimes some interesting things happen just because we're sketching away and we eliminated something just naturally, which is always nice when that happens. But what I would be trying to do is I'd be trying to keep that lightness, the way that light hits those branches, to me is, I think, the most important part of this particular scene. I think then the second most important parts are to keep that nice shape of the open water and then the shape of the reflected large branches. So as I sketch, those are the things that I think are most important. When I was doing the notan at at this particular scene myself, what I did, of course, once again, I'm working really quickly, and I do a notan, and I go, great, I like the design of this. This is great. But I decided to do another little sketch, not one that really was elevated to the point of being, the rough sketches I've been showing you, but kind of like a halfway point between a notan and a sketch, kind of like what I did at Dyke Bridge, where I feel like, okay, I need a little bit more information in here. A little more information than the notan. I know I've got the right design because the notan tells me I'm in the right direction, but I have got to put some more stuff in so that I remember what this scene looks like. And so I've got a little video I'll play for you in just a few minutes that shows you a bit of that process. And then I have another one to show you how I actually came home and actually drew it out in greater detail. So I'll give you just a few minutes to keep drawing here. I should have music, but that might be even more distracting than my chatter. Okay, I tried not to interrupt you too much this time, but just a couple more minutes. And another point I would like to make on this particular scene when you do move into doing something more detailed is how do you differentiate between all these kind of dark areas that you see? It's a little indistinct. You can't quite tell what's going on. You know there's some mossy edges, and you know there's some grass and this, that, and the other. So, to a certain extent, you can look and see what's going on to the best of your ability, and then you do kind of make things up. You want to have the grassy areas look grassy, so you have a look at the sort of the directions of lines that you see. So if I'm looking at the area on the right-hand side, the land on the right-hand side that kind of juts out a bit, I can see that there's flattened grass there. And so I'm going to want to use that information to help me decide which way my strokes are going. I can see that there are some daffodils in the distance, and of course those are going to have upright lines, and those are going to be reflected in the water in the same way. And so, and then I've got branches going up and branches that are going down. And so the leaves that are on those branches, I probably want to differentiate a little bit by having their strokes go in a different direction, or making sure that the darkness of those leaves looks a little different from whatever else is going on in this particular scene. So hopefully that gives you some hints. Okay, everybody, time to wrap this one up. I hope it was a little bit more calming to you to have a little bit more time to spend on this drawing. And now I'm going to show you what I was up to when I went to my toy. I left the bird song playing for this too. I thought it sounded great. So I'm setting up in the background, and I'm actually showing you my sketches from the last part of my day, just because I wasn't sure I'd shown them to the camera before. And I'm looking at this scene trying to figure out what to do. There'll be an image of the scene that'll pop up in just a second so you can see what's going on. And that's what I've decided through my viewfinder I want to draw, as you know. Now, when I do this, one of the things I'm looking for is I'm looking to see, where these large objects like that land on the left-hand side in the trees, how far down in my scene are they? Are they at the halfway point? Are they over on one side? And I'll hold that viewfinder up when I need to, just to double check that I've got objects in basically the right place. No, on a notan, you're not being, super careful, but you do want to, it's important to the design where everything lands. Sometimes I also decide, I'm going to make a few changes to what I'm seeing, either simplify or move a few things around. And this is my opportunity to give that a try to see if I feel that there should be a different shape somewhere. Sometimes when I get the actual sketch, I'll go back or I'll keep it the same. But the notan is the super quick way for me to figure this out. And up in the upper left-hand corner there, you can see what I ended up with, what the notan looked like. Very rough, but also very quick. So now I decided to do that sketch I talked about, where I was like, all right, I need a bit more information here before I leave my toy. Um, it was so nice not to have the wind blowing and to take a few minutes to actually think about what I was doing. So I'm trying to figure out that business I mentioned earlier. What am I going to concentrate on and what am I going to eliminate? What are the things that are the most interesting that I see in front of me? I knew my photographs wouldn't represent accurately what I was looking at, and I was right. And this is a good time for me to talk about drawing as visual note-taking. I find that when I go through the act of drawing, it's not so much because I'm going to rely on this exact sketch to tell me where to put lines. It's that when I go through the process of drawing like this and looking and recording, somehow in my mind, it fixes the scene to a greater extent than if I didn't do this. And so I think it's like, you might, if you listen to a lecture and you take notes, you're more likely to remember those parts of the lecture rather than if you just sat there and listened, even if you had your full attention on it. The details, the quotes, this, that, and the other, they really need to be written down. And it's the same for sketching. So I'm not worrying about, hey, is this looking like something that's going to hang in the Louvre? um, but I am concerned about what is capturing my attention. What do I see that I think is really interesting? Let's make sure we make a visual note of that. And that way it gets included. When I'm looking at the photograph later, if the photograph doesn't properly represent what I was seeing, I can pull out those elements from the photo by looking at these sketches. And it'll be in my head. That's the most important part. You'll notice I'm holding that mechanical pencil pretty close up near the tip. So after me telling you to hold it, hold all your pencils further back, I have to say when I'm out here like this in the field, I hold the pencil, wherever it happens to be, up near the tip, in the middle, whatever, and whatever it takes for me to be able to do the drawing. At this point, control and lights and darks are not my biggest concern. So I'm just about wrapping this up right now. I'm kind of noting where those darks are again, just making sure I have a bit of a plan for how I'm going to go forward, how I'm going to sort of keep it to the feeling of the notan. Um, I just love that about a mechanical pencil. You just a few clicks and you've got a bit more lead without even needing a pencil sharpener. Really useful for this sort of situation. And at this point, down there in the lower left, I'm figuring out how I can bunch all of those leaves up, and I was playing around right there with, should I include leaves near the bottom of the trunks in the reflection? Um, in this sketch, I didn't, eventually when I did something a little more careful, I did put the leaves back in, but you have to try. Have to experiment. And here are my notes about what I'm seeing, just in case, my reference material isn't useful. And you can see how, when you have a complicated scene like that, it's really useful to be able to boil it down to the essentials and to do it right there, standing there with your visual note taking and figure out how you're going to move forward. So now I'm going to show you how I moved forward. Okay, so what we're seeing here is I actually was in a hotel room. Look, and in my sketchbook, I did a little sketch using I just laid out the lines. And then what I did was I put some of the dark areas in and then smudged them in with some of those smudge tools that I have and my finger. Then I took the eraser and I picked out the highlights. You can see here I sort of picked out some of the areas that I wanted to make sure they were cleaner. Then using some of my most basic pencils, just sort of the mid-range pencils, I started in and drew. And this was probably 15 or 20 minutes worth of work. And then I kind of went back to that notan and tried to get the depth of it again. So those are the best pictures of the process, but they show you sort of how I got to an end result. And if you are interested, you can watch this video in replay, and those images will be part of the PDF, and you can see a little bit more closely what I did. So here are two exercises I'd like you to consider for sort of homework this next week. I think you'll find them really useful based on all the things that you've done so far. So the first one is to sketch these trees and bushes, paying attention to which side of the tree or bush or branch is lighter and which is darker. And you can see that by squinting. Very difficult to see if you don't squint with all of that green going on. And then try to use your pencil strokes and texture. And you can smudge a little bit, pick things out with an eraser, do whatever you'd like to use light and dark pencils or just apply more pressure to differentiate between these different types of trees. So we have a number of different types of trees here. This is not an easy thing to do, but the practice of it is really useful. What'll happen your first go through, what's likely to happen is you'll put too much stuff down, too much information, and you'll have to figure out how to back that up a bit. The way I recommend going about it is starting with the dark areas. Do your outline-ish stuff that uh, helps you, put the bush where it's supposed to be and puts the tree where it's supposed to be. Or you can just do only the tree or only one of these bushes, whatever you would like. So you put some lines down to indicate where everything should go. Here's the general shape of this bush. And then you go and you find where the darkest areas are and you put those in. And those are sort of like your anchors. And then from there, you can kind of work your way out to the midtones and figure out where is the point that you need to stop. So there's one exercise. And the second exercise is this scene right here. So what happens is you're out in a place like My Toy and you see a beautiful vista and you say, I would love to draw that, but I don't have time to do it now. I'm just going to take a picture. And when you get home, you get something like this. What has happened is when I was there, the tree on the left with the kind of pom-pom things on them and that beautiful big fir tree were very prominent and seemed close to me. And everything else seemed further back. But the camera flattened the scene out extremely. And so I have to remember how to manipulate that when I draw it. So what I would like to suggest to you is that, you don't have to do a notan at this point because this is kind of the scene. But I would try to draw this scene so that you have varying degrees of detail and that the background, in other words, everything behind that very tall fir tree that's sort of blowing over to the left, everything at the back is really, really light in pencil, and that you don't even really see it with any kind of detail. You're doing what Lloyd Rees would do. So I would refer back to Lloyd Rees's drawings and even look him up online because there are billions of examples of his. Well, okay, that's a bit of an exaggeration. There are many examples of his drawings and lots of trees. He liked trees a lot. But this idea of of creating an atmospheric distance even when the camera doesn't give you one. And at the same time, figuring out how you're going to pull out what's interesting about the foreground trees and also about that the bridge there. Now, needless to say, this is a perfect example of why a little sketch like I did or a little notan helps you figure this out when you get home, helps you figure out how to differentiate your scene. So, lastly, so before we move on to next week with charcoal, just to recap, using pencils for sketching outside plein air or sketching landscapes in general, a pencil can only offer so much in the way of color. So really working on this idea of different values of light, medium, and dark is super important. And it will be super important in all the other types of drawing we're doing as well. So just continue to practice that. A variety of pencil strokes is really helpful in landscape drawing. Just trying to get the sense of growth, how things move, how the land rolls. All of that is really helpful. And perspective, it applies to landscape just as it does to streets and trees and boxes and cups and everything that we look at. So just look at your natural surroundings and be aware of that. It's all information you can file away. 50% a complicated scene by using a viewfinder, and you don't have to draw every little thing that you see. But one way to handle complicated items of similar values is to do the sort of thing that Lloyd Rees did, where he sort of mashed together or allowed one object to disappear into another. And just have a look at how he handled that in his drawings. It's just beautifully done. However, there is no right way to draw. So any artist will draw in multiple ways and you can draw in multiple ways. When you go out and start sketching, if you're like, oh, this just doesn't look right, um, I wouldn't be so judgmental about your artwork. I would just go ahead and finish your sketch and look at it in a couple of days, and you will probably find that there's some real charm to it that you might not have seen at the moment. And also, it is visual note taking. You're not necessarily trying to produce works of art. Like I said before, sometimes art happens. You'll do a sketch and later you look at it and you go, wow, that actually turned out quite well. But at the time, you're just trying to note take about what you're seeing, trying to record it, and enjoying the moment, being out there in nature or drawing something that you saw that you thought was really beautiful when you were outside, if you're back in your studio. That's the important part. So however you get there, and just go ahead and give it a try. Do as much drawing as you possibly can. And thank you once again for being here for Summer of Drawing and for doing some landscape drawing using pencil.